You've been riding for decades. You think you know what to expect, but there is a gap most returning riders do not realize is there. It is not about skill. It is not about courage. It is about what happened to your body and your brain while you were away from two wheels. Maybe you stopped riding in your 30s when the kids came along, or maybe you parked the bike after a close call and told yourself you would get back to it someday. And now someday is here. The kids are grown. The garage has space. And every time you hear a V-twin rumbling through the neighborhood, something in your chest tightens. It is time to get back on a bike. But here is something that most beginner content, most dealership sales pitches, and most riding buddies are not emphasizing nearly enough. The version of you that is climbing back on that motorcycle is running on fundamentally different hardware than the version that parked it 20 years ago. Over the next 25 minutes, we are going to walk through everything that changes when you ride past 50. The physical shifts you cannot feel happening, the mental blind spots you do not know you have, the technology gap that might actually save your life if you let it, and the gear that did not even exist the last time you threw a leg over a motorcycle. This is not about scaring you off bikes. It is about making sure the dream does not end on a stretcher. Let us start with the numbers, because they tell a story that should make every returning rider pay attention. In 1975, riders aged 50 and older accounted for about 3% of all motorcycle deaths in the United States. That was 81 people. Fast forward to 2023, riders over 50 accounted for 33% of all fatalities, over 2,000 deaths in a single year. That is 26 times higher in raw numbers. Now, to be fair, and this is important context, far more older people are riding today than in the 1970s. The median age of an American motorcycle owner went from 27 in 1985 to 50 in 2018. That is a staggering demographic shift. So of course, more older riders means more older rider fatalities. But even accounting for that shift, the data from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety tells a more uncomfortable story. Older riders don't just crash at the rate you'd expect from their numbers on the road. They crash worse, significantly worse. A research team studying North Carolina crash data found the serious and fatal injury rate for riders 45 and older was about 21% compared to roughly 15% for riders aged 16 to 24. That's nearly 50% higher. Brown University researchers found that in some data sets, older riders were 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer fatal or serious injuries in crashes compared to younger riders. An Italian trauma center study spanning more than a decade documented a survival rate of about 84% for riders over 55 versus nearly 95% for younger riders. Same types of crashes, very different outcomes. And here's what makes the pattern even more interesting. Older riders aren't crashing the way you'd think. They're crashing at intersections more often than young riders, in daylight, on higher speed roadways. According to NHTSA data, speeding involvement actually drops steadily with age. Alcohol involvement peaks in the 35 to 49 range and declines significantly for riders over 65. The problem for older riders isn't recklessness, it isn't showing off. It's that aging bodies break more easily, react more slowly, and heal far less efficiently than they used to. And here's the real kicker. Most riders have no idea how much has changed because the changes happen gradually, invisibly, over decades. So let's pull back the curtain on what's actually going on inside your body when you're 50, 55, 60 years old and swinging a leg over a motorcycle. The first thing that changes, and the last thing most riders notice, is reaction time. On average, simple visual reaction time sits around 220 milliseconds in your 20s. By your 50s, it climbs to roughly 270. By your 60s, it is around 295. And by your 70s, it hovers around 330 milliseconds. That's approximately a 50% increase over youthful baselines. Now, individual variation is real. Some 60-year-olds test faster than some 30-year-olds. Fitness, sleep, mental sharpness, genetics, all of these play a role. But on average, the trend across large population studies is clear and consistent. A 2022 study out of Johns Hopkins found something interesting about why this happens. The slowdown is not because your hands or feet cannot move quickly. Your body can still initiate action fast. The problem is upstream. Your brain takes longer to prepare the response, to process the situation, to evaluate the options, to commit to a decision. In a car, that extra processing time is usually absorbed by seatbelts, airbags, and a 2-ton steel cage around you. On a motorcycle, it is absorbed by your body. At 60 miles per hour on a motorcycle, an extra 75 milliseconds of reaction time translates to roughly 6.5 additional feet of travel before you even begin to brake or swerve. That can be the difference between stopping in time and not. And here is the really tricky part. You cannot feel your reaction time getting slower. Nobody wakes up one morning and thinks, well, I am 57 milliseconds behind today. It is invisible. It is gradual. And on a motorcycle, invisible problems have a way of becoming very visible very suddenly. Now let's talk about something that will hit hard for anyone who loves evening rides or rides home from dinner on a warm summer night: your night vision. The aging eye admits less light through the pupil. That is just the physics of getting older. But the problem goes deeper. Research shows that dark adaptation, the process your eyes go through when transitioning from bright to dim conditions, slows noticeably with each decade past 50. Think about pulling off a brightly lit highway onto a dark rural road. At 30, your eyes adjust in seconds. At 60, that adjustment takes meaningfully longer. Contrast sensitivity drops too. That is your ability to distinguish a dark object against a dark background. A pothole on a dimly lit road. A patch of gravel in the shadow of an overpass. A deer standing on a dark shoulder. Studies have found dramatic drops in contrast sensitivity between different age groups. And for motorcyclists, where the margin between seeing a hazard and not seeing it can be measured in fractions of a second, this matters. One ophthalmology review described the cumulative effect in older drivers as something comparable to reduced light sensitivity, almost like permanently seeing less detail in low light conditions. For a car driver, this is an inconvenience. You squint, you slow down, you get home. For a motorcycle rider where you are the crumple zone, it is a genuine safety factor. And then there is glare recovery. Every motorcyclist knows the moment when an oncoming car hits you with high beams and your world goes white for a second or two. At 25, your eyes snap back fast. At 55 or 60, that recovery window stretches noticeably. 3 or 4 extra seconds of compromised vision on a motorcycle at speed changes the equation in ways that should make you think twice about that midnight ride. Now let's talk about something almost nobody wants to admit: your hands, specifically your grip. Data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey shows that on average, grip strength declines roughly 1 to 2% per year after 50. Men lose about 10% by their 50s compared to their peak, about 16% by their 60s, and close to 29% by their 70s. And after about age 72, the rate of decline accelerates to nearly a kilogram per year. Think about what your hands actually do on a motorcycle. Your right hand manages the throttle and the front brake lever, which is the single most important control on the bike. Your left hand operates the clutch. On a long ride through mountain switchbacks, you are squeezing, modulating, adjusting every few seconds for hours at a time. If your grip strength has dropped 15 or 20% from its peak, your hands are going to fatigue faster. Your clutch pulls are going to feel heavier as the ride goes on. And in an emergency braking situation, the maximum squeeze force you can apply to that front brake lever may genuinely be less than what you are mentally counting on. This is not a reason to stop riding, but it is a very good reason to pay attention to handlebar ergonomics, adjustable lever reach, and maybe to choose a bike with a hydraulic clutch instead of a cable-operated one. Small equipment choices can make a big difference when your hardware is changing. While we are being honest about the body, let's talk about balance, because this one catches returning riders completely off guard. Your inner ear contains the vestibular system. It tells your brain which way is up, how fast you are tilting, and whether you are accelerating or decelerating. And it degenerates with age through hair cell loss and neuronal decay. Research in neurology journals shows that postural sway, Basically, how much you wobble when standing still increases measurably as you age, especially on uneven surfaces. Now, while that research primarily studied walking and standing balance, the same vestibular systems are directly involved when you are handling a motorcycle at low speed. Every parking lot U-turn, every gravel driveway, every gas station entrance with an unexpected slope, every stop sign on a slight hill. These are all vestibular challenges, and if you have not been on a motorcycle in 15 or 20 years, your vestibular fitness for bike-specific balance has not been trained. This is why returning riders so often experience what the riding community politely calls a tip-over. You pull into a gas station, the pavement slopes slightly to the left, your foot goes down, and it is a little lower than expected. And suddenly, 800 pounds of touring motorcycle is going sideways in slow motion while you scramble to hold it up. It happens to more returning riders than anyone wants to admit. And it happens because the balance you remembered having and the balance you actually have are two different things. Right, now we need to talk about the brain. And honestly, this might be the most important section in this entire video because the physical stuff is at least somewhat intuitive. You can feel stiff joints. You can notice your eyes straining at night. But cognitive changes are sneaky. You cannot see them from the inside. Processing speed peaks around age 18 or 19, and it gradually declines from there. But a landmark 2022 study published in Nature Human Behaviour, analyzing over 1 million participants, found a crucial nuance that makes the picture more complicated. Actual mental speed stays relatively high until approximately age 60. Much of the measured slowdown before 60 reflects increased decision caution, not genuine cognitive decline. Your brain at 55 can still process information quickly, but it takes longer to commit to an action. It second guesses more. It wants more certainty before pulling the trigger. In a boardroom, that is wisdom. On a motorcycle, delayed decisions can reduce your margin for error in ways that matter enormously. And there is the divided attention problem. Riding a motorcycle requires you to simultaneously monitor the road surface, scan for hazards on the left and right, check your mirrors, manage speed, select gears, maintain balance, read traffic patterns, and adjust your road position, all at the same time, all the time. Simulated driving studies confirm that this kind of multitasking performance becomes measurably harder with age, even when each individual task feels manageable on its own. It is the simultaneous demand that degrades. But the factor that motorcycle safety researchers consider one of the most overlooked risks for the 50-plus demographic is not physical, and it is not cognitive. It is psychological. Overconfidence. Your brain may still assume you can ride the way you used to. You remember leaning into corners with confidence. You remember the feeling of a perfectly rev-matched downshift. You remember being smooth, being competent, being good at this. And that memory feels like current ability. But motor skills degrade substantially when they go unpracticed for 10 or 20 years. Countersteering instincts get dull. Emergency braking reflexes lose their sharpness. Clutch control finesse disappears without regular use. These are not like riding a bicycle, where the basic coordination comes back in minutes. Motorcycle skills at the level required for safe road riding are perishable. One motorcycle coach describes the phenomenon as a classic Dunning-Kruger problem. Riders who have not had their skills assessed in a controlled environment tend to have confidence that significantly outpaces their current competence. They remember being a rider. But functionally, they are a beginner in an experienced rider's body. And beginners on powerful motorcycles is a combination that shows up in crash statistics constantly. UK police captured this problem with brutal clarity when they described returning riders who do not seem to realize how much bikes have changed over the past 2 or 3 decades. These riders come back with more disposable income and buy machines that are, in the words of one police report, far more advanced and capable than anything they once rode. The UK Association of Chief Police Officers found that men aged 40 to 49 accounted for 60% of all motorcyclists killed in some regions. They even coined a term for it, born-again bikers. Which brings us to what might be the single biggest surprise for any rider who has been away from motorcycles for 15 or 20 years, the motorcycle itself. If the last bike you owned had carburetors, a cable-operated throttle, drum brakes in the rear, and maybe if you were lucky, a pair of preload adjustable rear shocks, you need to sit down for this. Modern motorcycles are computers on two wheels. The most important technology you need to understand is anti-lock braking systems, often called ABS. A comprehensive 2022 study from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety examined 65 motorcycle models across nearly 2 decades and found that anti-lock braking systems reduce fatal crash involvements by 22% overall. For standard and cruiser motorcycles, the types that older and returning riders tend to prefer, that reduction reached 32%. A European cross-national study found injury crash reductions of 24 to 34%. As of the 2020 model year, 56% of motorcycles sold in the United States included anti-lock braking systems as standard equipment, and another 26% offered it as an option. The European Union has mandated anti-lock braking systems on all new motorcycles over 125 cubic centimeters since 2016. But anti-lock braking systems are just the starting point. Today's mid-range and premium motorcycles feature traction control that monitors wheel speed and intervenes when traction breaks. Cornering anti-lock braking systems adjust braking force based on lean angle using 6-axis inertial measurement units. Ride-by-wire throttle replaces the mechanical cable connection with electronic sensors and software. Electronic suspension adjusts damping hundreds of times per second, rather than the manual preload knob you use to crank by hand. Quick shifters allow clutchless gear changes up and down. Multiple ride modes adjust power delivery, throttle response, and intervention levels for rain, sport, and touring conditions. And full-color TFT dashboards with Bluetooth connectivity, GPS navigation, and tire pressure monitoring are common. If you learn to ride on a bike where the throttle was a cable pulling a slide in a carburetor, this is not an evolution. It is a completely different species of machine. And here is where it gets dangerous for returning riders. Some of them do not trust these electronic systems. They have spent their whole riding memory relying on their own feel to modulate brakes and manage traction. When ABS pulses under their hand, it feels wrong. Some riders actually disable safety features because they seem intrusive or unnatural. That instinct is understandable. A lot of experienced riders were explicitly taught to manually threshold brake without locking the wheel. It was a skill, a point of pride. And it is a skill that modern anti-lock braking systems do better than any human alive, especially an out-of-practice human. The safety gear situation has undergone an equally dramatic transformation. 20 years ago, good motorcycle protection meant a leather jacket, maybe an armored back protector, and a full-face helmet. That was the top tier. Today, you can buy an airbag vest that deploys faster than a car airbag. Products like the Alpine Star's Tech Air system use onboard accelerometers and gyroscopes to detect a crash in progress, and fully inflate in 20 to 40 milliseconds. That is faster than you can blink. These systems reduce impact force by up to 95% compared to traditional passive armor. They have been mandatory in MotoGP since 2018, and across more than 2,000 recorded crashes in professional racing, they have maintained a 100% deployment success rate. More affordable tethered airbag systems from manufacturers like Helite start under $300. Helmet technology now includes MIPS, which stands for Multi-Directional Impact Protection System. It is a low-friction slip plane built inside the helmet shell that allows the helmet to rotate slightly on impact, reducing the rotational forces that cause the majority of traumatic brain injuries. Over 120 helmet brands now incorporate MIPS technology. Modern body armor has gone from bulky hardshell plates to materials like D3O that stay soft and flexible during normal wear, but lock rigid on impact when the molecules bond together under force. Today's CE Level 2 rated armor provides protection that would have been science fiction when you bought your last riding jacket. If you're planning to get back on a motorcycle wearing a 20-year-old leather jacket and a helmet from 2004, you're leaving genuinely life-changing protection on the table. Now, we need to discuss something that almost nobody in the motorcycle community talks about openly, and it might be the most important hidden risk factor of all: medications. The AAA Foundation found that 69% of adults aged 55 and older use at least one prescription medication that has the potential to impair driving ability. And only 18% of those people received any warning from their doctor about impairment risks. The list of common medications that can affect your ability to ride a motorcycle is long and startlingly familiar. Blood pressure medications like ACE inhibitors have been associated with a 23% greater motor vehicle crash rate in clinical studies. Calcium channel blockers showed a 25% increase. Beta blockers can cause sedation, fatigue, and dizziness. First-generation antihistamines like diphenhydramine, also known as Benadryl, cross the blood-brain barrier and impair reaction time even when you do not feel drowsy. Opioid pain medications impair psychomotor function, with the highest risk in the first 4 to 5 days after starting or adjusting a dosage. Statins, which millions of Americans take for cholesterol, can cause muscle weakness and myalgia that directly affects grip strength and endurance. Benzodiazepines and sleep medications like Ambien can produce next morning residual impairment that you might not even notice. And diabetes medications carry the risk of hypoglycemia, blood sugar drops that can cause dizziness, confusion, or in severe cases, loss of consciousness. It is important to note that some of this increased crash risk may also reflect the underlying health conditions these medications are prescribed for, not just the drugs themselves. Someone on blood pressure medication may also have cardiovascular issues that independently affect their alertness and physical capability. Either way, a conversation with your doctor specifically about how your medications interact with motorcycle riding is one of the most important and most commonly skipped safety steps for returning riders over 50. And because drug metabolism slows with age, all of these effects tend to last longer in an older body. A medication that clears your system by early afternoon at 35 might still be having subtle effects into the evening at 60. Here is the part nobody wants to hear, but everyone returning to riding needs to understand. What happens when an older rider goes down is fundamentally different from what happens to a 25-year-old in the same crash at the same speed. Osteoporosis affects approximately half of all postmenopausal women and 1 in 5 men over 50. Research published in accident analysis journals found that osteoporosis increases the risk of a severe spinal fracture in vehicle crashes by more than 3 times. A 2025 study examining over 58,000 motorcycle crash patients aged 50 and over found that nearly 15% were classified as frail, and frailty independently predicted higher mortality and higher rates of discharge to long-term care facilities rather than home. Older riders suffer significantly higher rates of rib fractures and thoracic injuries compared to younger riders in similar crashes. And when those fractures happen in bones weakened by age-related density loss, the damage is compounded. Then there is recovery time, and this might be the starkest contrast of all. A younger rider breaks a collarbone and is back in a sling for 6 to 8 weeks, maybe doing light riding again in 3 months. An older rider with the same fracture faces 12 weeks or more of healing time. Animal models of fracture repair in elderly subjects show nearly twice the healing duration, with decreased expression of the growth factors that drive bone regeneration. There's a saying among motorcycle safety instructors that gets right to the point. A 20-year-old will bounce, a 50-year-old will break. Consider Sherry, a surgical assistant at Mayo Clinic who had been riding accident-free for 31 years. Experienced, competent, careful. She was airlifted after a crash with a traumatic brain injury, a fractured pelvis, and several fractured cervical vertebrae. She spent 11 months recovering before she could return to work. And she has no memory of what went wrong. Now, that doesn't mean older riders can't ride safely. Millions do every single year without incident. Experience, patience, and better judgment can genuinely offset many of these physical risks, but only when those advantages are paired with honest self-assessment. The consequences of a crash at 55 are not the same as they were at 25, and that reality deserves acknowledgement, not dismissal. So who are all these riders flooding the dealerships in their 50s and 60s? And what is driving this wave? The pattern is remarkably consistent. Someone rode in their late teens or 20s. They got married, they had kids, they needed a minivan or an SUV, the motorcycle went into a friend's garage or got sold on Craigslist. Then, somewhere around 48 or 55 or 62, the kids move out, the house is paid down, and suddenly there is both money and time. The dream that got shelved 2 decades ago starts calling again. The Motorcycle Industry Council data captures this precisely. the proportion of riders aged 50 and over grew from 10% in 1990 to 46% by 2014. 24% of current motorcycle owners in America are retired. The median household income of motorcycle owners has climbed steadily, meaning these returning riders have real purchasing power. They walk into the dealership with nostalgia, a credit card, and an identity. I used to ride, therefore I am a rider. And the machines they buy compound the risk in ways they do not realize. Engine sizes of fatally involved motorcycles have surged over the decades. In 2023, 33% of fatally involved motorcycles had engines over 1,400 cubic centimeters. Compare that to less than 1% in 1990. Riders who last managed a 450 in their youth are now straddling 800-pound touring machines with 3 times the horsepower and electronic systems they have never encountered before. Bernadette Murphy, a 48-year-old professor, bought a Harley Sportster the day after her father died and described the experience as feeling more alive than she had in years. Kim McLaren, who started learning to ride after 50, wrote with raw honesty about how the process humbled her. That learning is hard on the ego. After spending decades as the expert in the room, being a beginner again was almost unbearable. That humbling feeling is common. A former MSF instructor described a scenario he sees constantly. Older men spot a group of experienced riders gathered at a breakfast spot on a Saturday morning. Bikes gleaming, riders relaxed, laughing, looking like they are living the good life. And the observer thinks, I want that. What they do not recognize is that those riders at the breakfast spot might have 50 years of continuous experience. They never stopped. They never had a 20-year gap. The emotional pull is real, and nobody should dismiss it. Motorcycles are one of the few things in life that genuinely make you feel alive. But the gap between the dream and the physical reality is exactly where people get hurt. So is the answer to just give up? Sell the leathers? Cancel the dream and watch motorcycle videos on YouTube from the couch for the rest of your life? No, not even close. Put this in perspective. Millions of riders over 50 ride safely every single year without incident. Experience, patience, better judgment, and the willingness to ride within your actual limits rather than your remembered limits can offset a tremendous number of these risks. The riders who fare best are not the ones who ignore the data. They are the ones who respect it and adapt accordingly. The Motorcycle Safety Foundation offers training courses specifically designed for this situation. The Basic Rider Course 2, called BRC2, is a one-day program conducted on your own motorcycle. It focuses on the skills returning riders need most: low-speed control, cornering technique, and emergency braking. The MSF Street Strategies course is built for current riders who want to stay sharp, or for riders returning after time away. Ohio developed something particularly smart. A returning rider program called BRSRR begins with a skills assessment. If you cannot demonstrate basic clutch control during the evaluation, they redirect you to the novice course instead. That takes institutional courage and personal honesty. The skills that degrade fastest during a long break from riding are exactly the ones that matter most when something goes wrong. Clutch control and friction zone management. Counter-steering instinct, the counterintuitive push steering technique that every motorcycle relies on above parking lot speeds. Emergency braking, meaning both the physical technique and the psychological willingness to grab that front brake hard when every instinct says do not. Slow speed maneuvering that demands balance, throttle control, clutch work, and rear brake all at once. And hazard perception, the mental scanning patterns experienced riders use to identify threats before they become emergencies. Ken Condon, author of Riding in the Zone and a veteran MSF instructor with decades of experience, put it as directly as anyone ever has. Get training. You may know how to operate a motorcycle, but that is not enough to ride safe and smart. You need to update your mental software and learn things you may not have known before. The expert consensus across every motorcycle safety organization converges on the same basic approach. Start on a smaller, lighter machine, 250 to 500 cubic centimeters. Yes, even if you used to ride a liter bike. Practice extensively in empty parking lots before you hit the road. Build your distance and traffic exposure gradually over weeks and months, not days. Invest in modern safety gear immediately, because returning riders often experience a tip over or two as they rebuild balance and composure. Talk to your doctor about your medications before your first ride, not after your first close call. And get a proper eye exam, specifically asking about night vision and contrast sensitivity. The dream is not dead. It just needs a smarter approach than it did the first time around. If this video changed the way you think about getting back on a motorcycle, or if it confirmed what you already suspected but nobody was saying out loud, hit subscribe. We cover motorcycle culture, safety, and the riding life every week. And if you know someone who's thinking about getting back on a bike after years away, send them this video. It might be the most important 25 minutes of their riding career.